So our last talk, at least the last one, what we have planned of the day, will be from zero to Azure, setting up your orchard application for success by Benedek Farkas, co-founder and managing director of Lombik Technologies, university guest lecturer since 2014. In this talk, Benedek will show an overview of an Azure environment tailored for orchard, enhanced by various open source components to aid developers and maintainers.
Thank you, Vicky. I think everyone can hear you because I think the sound system is working. So hopefully everything is in order for this presentation. So let's begin. I will, for part of this presentation, we are not going to present you because I will switch between windows. But for now, thank you everyone for coming to Orchard Harvest. My name is Benedek Farkas, as Vicky mentioned. This is basically the basic information, so co-founder of Lombik. That's our website. That's also my GitHub profile and my LinkedIn profile. I didn't put any socials there because I don't really use them, so if you want to reach out, I wouldn't even recommend LinkedIn. I would go for the email address, so that's over there, so that's pretty easy. So, and for the sake of time and scheduling, I will probably speed up my talk a little bit and just give you an overview. Initially, I was planning to go more in depth, but then I figured that we don't want to spend, 4.5 hours on the Azure portal where I explain everything and go through next, finish kind of stuff and wait for Azure to provision resources and things like that. So rather, this talk is going to be kind of an overview. If you don't know Azure, then roughly this is how you would go about setting up an environment where you can host your Orchard application, and really not just an Orchard application. So hopefully, when this goes on YouTube, maybe some new audience will stumble upon Orchard just because it's somewhat related to Orchard. So this is not just useful for Orchard core, but also for any ASP.NET Core application or any ASP.NET application, or a bunch more stuff. But this is an Orchard conference, so we are going to focus on Orchard and how nice it is to host it in Azure. So there's a bunch of you here who has developed like awesome Orchard applications, and you want to share it with the world, and you can hit Ctrl F5, open a port in your firewall and set up a port forwarding, maybe use a free dynamic DNS service and just YOLO it. So you can host it from your laptop and done. I don't know, we can go home now or just to have dinner and my presentation is done. Or actually I can just hand it over to Sebastian again because he will continue with Shapes after this. But if we want to get a bit more serious, so like I mentioned, I will go about explaining the basics of how an Orchard application can be set up in Azure. That's not really the only way that you can set up an application in Azure, but that's what we found quite effective and relatively simple to maintain. Like I said, this is not an in-depth guide. There are in-depth guides about Azure, so I really don't want to go into that area because there are much more knowledgeable people with better presentation skills on YouTube where they can explain really well what all those things in Azure do. And there's probably a lot of stuff that I don't even know about. But I want to give you some pointers and to explain how we do it in broad terms. So if you don't want to YOLO it, we need something more sophisticated and sort of in the order of control that you can have over your application's hosting environment. We can talk about on-premise hosting. So you purchase all the hardware, you manage all the hardware, you have complete control over it, but you have the most amount of headache. You can go infrastructure as service, so that usually just means virtual machines. And that's what we started with initially 12 years ago, I believe, and when we first published what was the Hungarian Orchard community blog. which is now just a static website, but all the blog posts are still there and you can read them. Well, most of you can't read it, or you can read it, but you won't understand it, but there's obviously a bunch of translators that will help you with that. There's also an English version, but the Hungarian one was the first one. And yeah, virtual machines, you obviously still need to care about Windows updates and installing stuff, and that's also a lot of headache, but at least you don't necessarily need to care about hardware failures, for example. And next sort of level, not necessarily the next level, but the next thing that I put on the list at least is containers. So that's still kind of dealing with virtual machines, but in a slightly different way of configuring your hosting environment, and that's its own different world. So I don't even want to go into that. That's deserves, I think, its own. It has its own conferences, and they last multiple days. So let's not go there. I'm not going to talk about containers for now, but that's also possible. And actually, with Orchard Core, it's super convenient. You can obviously host an ASP.NET Core application in a Linux environment as well. So you've got a bunch more options than what we had with Orchard One and ASP.NET MVC a couple of years back. Next one is platform as a service. That is going to be kind of the star of the show for my presentation for the remainder. So I will leave that for a bit later. And you have also software as a service, so that's where you have the least amount of control. And a really fine example of that is .NET.com. In case you haven't heard, it's a wonderful website where you can host your own application, your own Orchard Core site. Well, if you registered some time back and created Orchard One sites, then you can administer those as well. But now there's new sites can only be Orchard Core now, and obviously this is a shared hosting, so what it means is that you have less control, but you have the least amount of headache, so you don't need to care about anything basically other than just writing your own content and showing it to the world. So we have all of these options, and you really need to decide which is best for you. I kind of think about it as investment advice. So if someone tells you that 100% this is the thing that you need to do, then that person doesn't really know what they are talking about, because they don't really know you and your cases. So this is something that kind of you need to investigate for yourself, and there's a bunch of parameters that needs to be looked into, like barrier of entry. Obviously on premises has the largest one, but there's also maintenance effort, how much it costs, is there an upfront cost or is just a monthly cost, and how reliable and flexible it is. So those are really hard questions sometimes, but for now, like I mentioned, we are going to go with option number 4, which is platform as a service. And let's see. Like I said, this talk about is about Azure, but in reality, this talk could, if we had more time, venture into other hosting providers like Google Cloud and AWS as well. And what I'm going to show you in the later part of this presentation mostly apply to those providers as well, not directly, but they have their analogous resources and kind of ways of setting up things. When you're working with Azure, probably your primary way of interacting with it is the Azure portal, and the next option, if you are more inclined to use the command line, then Azure has its own kind of command line interface. You can also use PowerShell and the Azure PowerShell module package. By the way, these are links in the presentation. Obviously, you can't point towards the screen, but nothing will happen. But when we share the slides with you, you will be able to click on those, I think, and they are actual links. And there's also Cloud Shell, which runs in the browser, and you can choose to use Bash or PowerShell. So, very simple Azure fundamentals. in broad terms. At the top, you have basically your Active Directory or your organization. That's basically the top level, which sort of corresponds to your company, probably. Under that, you have subscriptions, which are kind of the next logical unit that you can manage, and we'll talk about subscriptions a bit more later on. But the idea here is that you can create these sort of silos which would roughly correspond to, let's say, departments within your company. And then you also have resource groups, and it kind of makes sense to put the resources that correspond to the same application into the same resource group. But you can, if you know that you are leaving your job in a couple of days and you are setting up the environment, you can, put things in all over the place and then make the next person's job harder. I don't know why would you do that. Please don't do that. But you can. But it's kind of logical to put let's say if you have an Orchard core application, then all the resources that you are using should probably go into the same resource group. And so what does it look like on a high level? So at the middle, or actually at the top, we have the resource group. Like I mentioned, it makes sense to put all the resources in this under this one. You also have the sort of communication services. We'll talk about that after my drink. Or actually a couple of slides down the line. But the main kind of star of the show is the app service plan and the app service. So the app service plan basically tells you how much resources you want to use, or you can select how much resources you want to use, and then that has an associated cost. The app service itself, so that's roughly a virtual machine, but it's not really a virtual machine in the sense that you won't be able to, remote desktop into it, and you shouldn't, because platform as a service, that would kind of defeat the purpose of platform as a service. So you just tell Azure that, hey, this is roughly the hardware I need, and that's it. And the next step is the app service itself. So this is where your application will live. And we have a couple of associated resources. This is by no means a complete list, just a rough overview. You can consider this a minimap. Up here, we've got application insights. So that's great for collecting telemetry from your application. It also comes, it doesn't come automatically, but due to our hard work, so to speak, it also comes with an open source module that you can use with your application. So it's very tightly integrated into your app, and then it will send a lot of useful information into Azure. And not just that, we will add a couple more interesting things later on too. Next one is blob storage. This is where files should go. So really, if you want to make your application or your application server stateless, you obviously should store as little runtime specific files on your application server as possible. And blob storage solves that problem partially by you being able to store your media files there, for example, and also the encryption keys. And for Orchard one, you could also store, not just Orchard one, but you can also store your tenant configuration files there. So basically, most of the things that go by default on the application server can be put into blob storage. But the most, the usual suspect, or the first one that everyone should start with, is the media files. And then we have Azure SQL and Azure SQL Database. This is just SQL Server, and this is just SQL Database, but the special sauce is obviously lies within Azure, and also the fact that it comes with a lot of flexibility and a lot of useful features that we will briefly mention. So if we move on to a slightly more advanced setup, you will see that basically we mirrored the right side of the screen, and instead of just calling this little piece app service, we call this app service slot, because by default your app service has one slot, which is called production, and you can have up to 32, 64, probably a power of 2, I don't know, but some number of slots, and those basically correspond to different hosting environments. So the next logical step is, if you have a production environment, you should probably have a staging or test environment or something like that. and that's what we do usually. We have a staging app service slot, and it also has its own separate resources, because obviously we need to look at the telemetry separately. You could actually use the same blob storage and just use different containers within that blob storage for all the environments, and that's also true for SQL Server and to some extent databases too. But it's nice to have things separated so that you can configure them separately. Maybe you don't need certain features that Azure provides for one environment and you need it for the other, or you want to configure it differently. So just for the sake of separating things and being able to manage things, it's easier to have all the resources mirrored. So before you get started and want to set up all this that I explained here, because roughly now you have the right pointers, and like I mentioned, a lot of great YouTube videos will actually tell you how to do these things step by step, really into a lot of details. You've got some decisions to make. The first decision that you need to make is how you will pay Microsoft for all this awesome stuff. First one is pay as you go. So you just provide your credit card number or debit card number, whatever card number, but probably not your, gym membership number. I don't know if that will work. I haven't tried. But if you do that, then they will take your money at the end of each month, and everyone's happy, probably. Next one is CSP, which stands for Cloud Solutions Provider. This basically means that you don't go to Microsoft directly, rather through another company who resells Azure services. And the benefit here for Microsoft, I guess, I don't know, is that they need to, it's less accounting or whatever. I don't know why it's good for them. But we don't really need to care about, because they've got a lot of cash, so their cash flow and financials are not for us to worry about. What we need to worry about is our, costs. And the benefit here is that your costs will actually go down, because you can get a couple of % off from the list prices that you will see on Azure. So if that's something that you would be interested in, then please reach out to us, because we can hook you up with it, and you will enjoy a couple % off from your hosting bill. Next one is, there are two things that they say is super difficult in development. One of them is cache busting strategy, the other one is naming things. So one of those will actually come up here, or actually, both of those will come up here because you are developing an application. So cache busting strategy is probably something that sooner or later will be a topic of discussion. But for now, in terms of the hosting environment, naming things is probably a concern. You should use something that is consistent, and the next person who is going to manage those resources won't pull their hair out just trying to find out which resource is connected to which one. And actually, Microsoft has obviously a vast documentation page. And one of the topics that they cover is naming pattern and naming patterns and suggestions related to that. Next one is data center regions. So you need to think about where you are and where your customers or users are. So the Azure Speed website will help you figure out which data centers are most convenient in terms of latency. So that doesn't need much explanation. Also, in this case, like I mentioned, you need to consider where your users will be, and if you don't know where the visitors of your website are, Application Insights can actually help you figure that out, and we will look at that very briefly later on. So, also before we dive into specific resources, some general tips. Add resource logs. So logs are a very simple feature in Azure. Actually, I will show you. Where is it? What is it? This is the web app. So if I go to logs, this basically allows you to put a read-only log or a delete log on a resource, which means that you cannot change the configuration or you cannot delete it. So like I said, not a very in-depth guide, but use this feature. If the UI is not very obvious, then, like I said, there are much better presentations about Azure features than this one. But the point here is that if you don't know about logs, then now you know about logs, and that is awesome because, I don't know who here uses Azure, but who here uses Azure? That's what I should have asked probably at the beginning. Okay, anyway, and Sebastian too, very good. He didn't hear the question, I think, but he saw that some people put their hands up and yeah, whatever. So who here that uses Azure actually deleted resources accidentally that they shouldn't have? Yeah. Oh, okay. So like 2/3 of the people who would have put their hand up for the first question. Okay. And follow-up question. Who here deleted a resource that they shouldn't have under someone else's subscription? Oh, it's just me. I actually did that accidentally with a client, and then I had to explain that, I just wanted to reset the staging environment because it was easier, because there was so much configuration that I should have changed. I just started from the beginning. And then, I set up the staging environment again and then put locks on it. I didn't know that they put locks on it, and I haven't checked. Anyway, I think they aren't using Orchard anymore, and I hope they won't really recognize them. I don't think they will watch this video, but if they will, then I'm sorry. But everything is fine. Everything was fine. I set it up. Everything is okay. So, second piece of wisdom that I would like to impart on you is don't forget about unused resources. So obviously, if you're testing stuff and things like that, there are resources where you pay based on usage, and there are resources where you pay based on time. And if you leave those running, then Microsoft will come after you, or the company that you pay for the subscription. And also, to help you with that and to avoid some unforeseen consequences, you can also set up alerts for the whole subscription or for a specific resource group. So if your usage goes above a certain limit, then you can receive alerts and act on it. And I don't know if there's a way in Azure to actually shut down resources when you reach a threshold, but it would probably be useful because, we have heard people having to pay, or well, in some cases they didn't have to pay, but their bill went up to tens of thousands of dollars because their AWS account, for example, was hacked through an access token that they published unintentionally on GitHub, and then people started mining Bitcoin on their virtual machines. So that's something that you should definitely avoid. I don't know if it's still a thing, but it shouldn't happen. So let's look at some concrete resources and some of the most important things that you should know about them. Not really in depth, but I will call out a couple of things that you should know about, and then we will also look at some of them. But I will try to speed up the presentation a little bit. So the app service, like I mentioned, is kind of the heart and soul of your application. Now, since we are using ASP.NET Core, we can choose between Windows and Linux. In our cases, so the applications that we host, we did extensive testing, like performance, because Windows machine costs twice as much compared to Linux machines. So you might get the same kind of hardware, but it's not really exactly the same. And then obviously there's a huge price difference, but we didn't really see an actual benefit of switching over from Windows to Linux. Obviously, since we were coming from the old, so to speak, ASP.NET MVC days and .NET Framework, we were starting with Windows, so that was the default for us. We didn't really see any benefit to switching over to Linux. Like I mentioned, the performance tiers, which basically dictate the hardware that you have, are built early. So if you have an application for testing, don't forget to shut it down if you don't need it anymore. And you have also the option for horizontal and vertical scaling. In broad terms, you can start with one instance, scale it up as much as possible to the highest level hardware, which will probably cost you, I don't know, thousands of dollars per month. So you can kind of grasp what sort of beasts are we talking about hosting your application at the highest tier. And then even if that's not enough for you, then you are probably a high roller, and you will need and you still have the option to scale horizontally. If I'm not mistaken, the OpenID certificates are still in the application hosting folder, so that kind of gets in the way of horizontal scaling. If I'm not mistaken, but please correct me if I am. But otherwise, all the things that I mentioned, and there's probably a bunch more things, you can kind of move those files away from the application file system. Also, it is also better to use blob storage for media just for performance's sake. So I don't think that really needs much more explanation. Let's move on. And the next one is application insights that I will show you a little bit. You can click on this link later on, which is a great explanation from Zoltán about the application insights module. See, you are in this presentation. That's nice. Teamwork makes the dream work. And I think this was quite a while back. There are some new features in the module since then, and one that I will show you later on, I think, is not mentioned in this video. But what comes with this, like I mentioned, is that there's a module that you can use as a NuGet package. It will hook into all sorts of, it will hook its class into all parts of your application, and send useful telemetry data that you can actually see and filter on and see charts. So it really gives you like a nice visual presentation of what's really going on with your application. A lot of the things that we changed with our own applications, either in terms of code or configuration, were because we saw stuff in application insights. So it's super useful. And like I mentioned before, it will also tell you where your users are. So it will probably help you choose a more convenient data center. If you are in Europe, for example, it kind of sounds logical for you to choose a European data center, but then you might see that you have a lot of customers from, Far East Asia, and then you might want to replicate your application there as well, so that they have a lower ping. So there's also an additional feature called availability tests and metric alert rules. These basically test your application. You can set it up for specific URLs, and also the Orchard Core health check is a good candidate for that, which is kind of this built-in feature that tells that basically just returns whether the application is okay or not okay, or maybe if it's not okay, it won't return anything, but that's also something you can detect, so that's fine. So you can set up those kind of tests, and also metric alert rules. So if something changes in your application, let's say your CPU usage, your free RAM, or whatever else, failed requests, all sorts of things, then you can have emails sent to you. Or if something really goes wrong with your application, you can also have, I thought it went away, but now it's just dark mode. So if something goes really wrong with your application, you can act on it. So Azure also gives you a lot of ability to kind of automate things. Like I mentioned, we have application insights here, even just a very default configuration. So if you just create an application insights resource, have it hooked up with your application, you already see a bunch of useful stuff here just by navigating to it. So you don't really need to work very hard. You can see how many of your requests failed within a certain time period. What is your server response time? What is how many requests hit your server, and what is your availability? And what you see here is our by the way, the naming convention I forgot to mention. But this is our main kind of application that hosts most of the websites of Lombik. So this includes lombik.com, Orchard Dojo, and some others, but these are the biggest ones. And also our naming convention is basically based on the name of the application, and then the region that it lives in, and we also suffix everything with the appropriate environment name. So this is what application insights give you by default. So you don't need to do anything about it, and it's already super useful. If you want to take it one step further with an availability test, then you can also include that. And for us, the condition is that if we are checking the site periodically, if there are 5 data centers in Azure around the world where the requests are failing over a couple of minutes, then we know that something's gone really wrong. So it's not just an intermittent error, something's not okay. And if that's the case, we obviously send an email because we need to know about it as soon as possible, but also the application will try to recover itself, and that is set up with a very simple Azure Logic app. If this alert is fired, then through a webhook we will call a Logic app, and if it says that the application is down, something's gone wrong, then we will just restart the web application. This is like there's this very nice visual designer. Won't go into too much detail here, but it's super easy to set up, and it will try to actually recover the application by restarting it. And obviously, if it doesn't work, then we know that something else needs to be done. But hopefully, by the time this happens, we already know about it and looking into it. But it's also a nice way to give a chance for the application to recover while we are sleeping, because I know sleep is for the weak, but we do that sometimes, and we can't just keep refreshing the lombi.com website all the time to see if it's okay. That's what this is for. So that's about application insights for now. Let's look at the blob storage. So very quickly, you have a storage account, that's basically the resource. You also have containers, which are kind of logical folders, or the highest level folders. You could think about it as a drive, for example, on your hard drive, or a partition. And then below that there are the blobs, which are just the files itself. What you can do is use the same storage account and configure Orchard Core so that your media files go into one specific container, and maybe even on other environments media files go to another container. But like I said, we just separate everything by environments, and encryption keys and all sorts of other things integrate very well with Azure in Orchard Core. So this is just the basics. What happens here? What matters here is that you also have redundancy. So by default, I think everything is replicated 2 more times in a single data center, but Azure gives you the ability to replicate all the data in another location, in another data center, or in the same area, in the same geographical area, and you can also replicate everything on the other side of the world if you want to. So that's also very useful. I don't know what needs to happen for kind of the second level redundancy, where basically your data is in another building in the same area to for that to go wrong. But I would imagine if that would happen, then a lot of people would have a much bigger problem to worry about than our media files. But who knows? And also, if geo redundancy fails, then everyone's in a huge trouble. So let's hope that doesn't happen. But it's kind of like insurance. So you obviously pay a bit more if the more redundancy or the higher level of redundancy you use. But who knows? You might need it someday. You also have data retention. You can tell the blob storage to soft delete everything, and you can recover your files for a certain number of days. Like I mentioned, for a production environment, you might set it to a certain number of days, but for your staging and test and whatever environment that are just for developers, you might set it to, I don't know, you might switch it off or just set it to 3 days or whatever. You also have a choice to make with performance. So there's standard versus premium. There's not much usefulness in explaining it very further. It's kind of like HDD and SSD. So Obviously, if you need higher I/O throughput, then choose premium. But like I mentioned, Application Insights will tell you if you actually need to use it. If you don't, then stick with standard, and if that's fine, then great, you spare some change. And usage or cost is actually calculated based on usage, so that's very simple to understand. If we are moving on to SQL Azure, that's basically where your data should live in databases. What we do is that we have one server for an environment, and that basically has a single database. Although if we wanted to host a multi-tenant application, we could also shard the tenant's data into different databases. So Orchard Core configuration gives you very simple ways to achieve that. But that's what we basically do. And one thing that we learned, well, not the hard way, because it didn't cause us that much trouble, but we learned through failure that you should access your database with a content user. So when you set up a SQL Azure server, you obviously have a system administrator password or server administrator password and credentials. If you go to your application's database through those kind of credentials, then you add some sort of overhead, because you go to the master database of the server first, and then go to your actual application database, and you will see that as a bit of overhead in your telemetry. So make sure to set up a separate user that accesses just that single database and use that for your connection string. Redundancy, super useful, kind of the same story as with Azure Blob Storage, so won't go into too much detail here. Point-in-time restore is also an awesome feature, so that's kind of your other half of your insurance in terms of saving your data if something goes wrong. You can roll back your database if something happens or it gets corrupted or whatever. And you pay for the databases based on the performance tier you choose. But that sort of dictates the hardware behind your server. Oh, and by the way, why do we put the different environments databases into their own servers? That's because even though you create a server and that has a master database by default, the application database that you create for your environment might be under that, or will be under that logical server, but in actual terms, on the actual hardware, it might be a separate place in the data center. And whatever you do with those databases, or if for example an update gets pushed, then only that database will be affected, because probably they are not updating all the servers at the same time. So this is just kind of making sure that whatever happens to that server and that database doesn't really bleed into other pieces of your environment. And that's about SQL Azure for now. We also mentioned communication services at the very beginning. This is a relatively new type of resource in Azure, and is designed for your application to be able to communicate with other applications. There's telephony and messaging services. So if you want to use, for example, SMS-based multi-factor authentication, then Azure Communication Services is your friend, although it's not supported in Orchard Core just yet. But the email communication services is supported with Orchard Core 2.0, or actually it's been in the source code for the past half a year, maybe. Or so if you are on the latest code, then you might have already used it or seen it, at least in your feature list. But fortunately, not fortunately, it's not fortunate, it's work. It's a lot of work, but we now have an Orchard Core 2.0, and the email communication services is part of the new features, and I think Mike mentioned that already. There's also a messaging feature, so that might be something interesting for later on for Orchard Core. So that's kind of like if you want to build your own WhatsApp or whatever. And cost is also based on usage. So for emails, I think they are there's a tier where you pay a certain amount, and if you go above above the allowed number of emails, then you pay a certain amount per email, which is 0.000 whatever something. So it's per email, it's very low, but obviously if you send tens of thousands of emails, then even then it will be a couple of dollars, I don't know. So it's very nice. We are actually going to transition over our applications to using that. Before that, we were using SendGrid, which is kind of integrated into Azure. It's more like a link to an external service, but you can manage it partially from your Azure subscription. Yeah, and that's kind of easier to set up before Orchard Core 2.0 because it's a simple SMTP server. But with the email communication services, the configuration is slightly different. It's not an SMTP server directly in terms of how you configure it, although you can do that too. If you really want to use Azure communication services, even with your Orchard One application, which supports SMTP, you can do that too. It's just kind of a weird roundabout way of configuring it, but it's possible. And I need to speed up as far as I know. So there's Elasticsearch as well. It's also an external service, obviously useful because you can move your indexing files from the application server. It's multi-tenant friendly because the index names are prefixed with the tenant name, so that's one less thing you need to worry about. And you choose the hardware tier in terms of CPU and RAM, and that's basically what you pay for. And last step is developer interactions. Very quickly, yes. So if you have your own Azure environment, which hopefully is not too distant for you if you haven't set up or haven't used Azure already, we've got some very useful GitHub Actions workflows for you. We've got one for deploying, which uses the publish profile of the web application slot that you can download, so you just grab it, configure your repository. We've got one for resetting environments. So what we do here very quickly is if you have an environment, you can basically reconfigure it with the media files and the database as a copy of another environment. So in our case, we have a staging environment where we continuously push new code that we are testing, and whenever we test like major changes, we want to reset the database and the media files, and that's what this workflow does basically automatically. And also, if you want to finalize your changes and whatever you have in staging, you want it to be pushed into production, then you can swap the application from staging to production, for example, and that's what this workflow does. I'm kind of out of time, so I have these pointers for you for later, but it's all up on GitHub. It has very nice documentation and it's easy to configure. You basically need to copy paste what we have in the documentation and just configure a couple of things very quickly. Bonus, use Cloudflare with your application. It gives you free HTTP certificates if you manage your domain with Cloudflare. It also has a really great firewall, and it fights bots, so it can keep away malicious requests from your application. And okay, I will talk to you about application insights, release annotations over dinner or whatever. But for now, that's it from me. If you have any questions, fire away. Okay, great, because we don't have time for that. Perfect. Thank you.